Good day, everybody. This is Yin Yang in California with Morsels of a Thought number 1713. And today we've got Words and Wisdom Wednesday. I wanted to read from Abe Lincoln and Martin Luther King and see what we get. Because I don't want to talk politics, and I do want to talk virtue. The Book of Virtues is a treasury of great moral stories, but edited with commentary by William J. Bennett. I'm reading from this, and I want to bring more virtue into the world, morsels of a thought at a time. Morsels of a thought at a time means that when you find out the right things to do, you have wisdom. When you do them, you've got virtue. We bring virtue into the world by finding out the right things to do. See? All right. So, right now, we are reading The Second Message to Congress by Abraham Lincoln. Now, William J. Bennett's commentary is that in December 1862, with the Northern War effort seemingly grinding to a halt and public opinion turning against him, Abraham Lincoln resolutely wrote Congress that the federal government now faced two moral and political obligations: preserve the Union and free the slaves. In Lincoln's mind, the two objectives had at this point become inseparable. He made his plea despite the protestations of some advisers who called his emancipation plans reckless and destructive. Here is the voice of a leader asking his fellow countrymen to cast off the prejudices of generations and follow the dictates of right and reason. 1 month later, Lincoln would sign the Emancipation Proclamation. Now, the story. Now, the second message to Congress by Abraham Lincoln. A nation may be said to consist of its territory, its people, and its laws. The territory is the only part of which is of certain durability. One generation passeth away, and another generation cometh, but the earth abideth forever. Quote, end quote. It is of the first importance to duly consider and estimate this ever enduring part, that portion of the earth's surface which is owned and inhabited by the people of the United States is well adapted to be the home of one national family, and it is not well adapted for two or more. Its vast extent and its variety of climate and productions are of advantage in this age for one people, whatever they might have been in former ages. Steam, telegraphs, and intelligence have brought these to be an advantageous combination for one united people. In the inaugural address, I briefly pointed out the total inadequacy of DIS, as a remedy for the differences between the people of the two sections. I did so in language which I cannot improve, and which therefore I beg to repeat. Quote, one section of our country believes slavery is right and ought to be extended, while the other believes it is wrong and ought not to be extended. This is the only substantial dispute. Physically speaking, we cannot separate. We cannot remove our respective sections from each other, nor build an impassable wall between them. A husband and wife may be divorced and go out of the presence and beyond the reach of Okay, sorry about that. I should have put the phone into silent mode. Okay, so we are still on Abraham Lincoln's words here in the middle of the paragraph that he is quoting himself in. A husband and wife may be divorced and go out of the presence and beyond the reach of each other, but the different parts of our country cannot do this. They cannot but remain face to face, and intercourse, either amicable or hostile, must continue between them. It is possible, then, to make that intercourse more advantageous or more satisfactory after separation than before. Is it possible then to make that intercourse more advantageous or more satisfactory after separation than before? Can aliens make treaties easier than friends can make laws? Can treaties be more faithfully enforced between aliens than laws among friends? Suppose you go to war. You cannot fight always, and when, after much loss on both sides and no gain on either, you cease fighting, the identical old questions as to terms of intercourse are again upon you. Now he's finished with his own quote of himself, and he says, if there ever could be a proper time for mere catch arguments, that time surely is now. In times like the present, men should utter nothing for which they would not willingly be responsible through time and in eternity. I do not forget the gravity which should characterize a paper addressed to the Congress of the nation by the chief magistrate of the nation, nor do I forget that some of you are my seniors, nor that many of you have more experience than I in the conduct of public affairs. Yet I trust in that in view of the great responsibility resting upon me, you will perceive no want of respect to yourselves in any undue earnestness I may seem to display. The dogmas of the quiet past are inadequate to the stormy present. The occasion is piled high with difficulty, and we must rise with the occasion. As our case is new, so we must think anew and act anew. We must disenthrall ourselves, and then we shall save our country. Now, I'm still quoting Abraham Lincoln in the second address to Congress. I am reading from the Book of Virtues, edited and commentary by William J. Bennett. We are on 1713. Okay, back to the book. Abraham Lincoln. Fellow citizens, we cannot escape history. We of this Congress and this administration will be remembered in spite of ourselves. No personal significance or insignificance can spare or another of us. Oh, can spare one or another of us. The fiery trail through which we pass will light us down in honor or dishonor to the latest generation. We say we are for the Union. The world will not forget that we say this. We know how to save the Union. The world knows we do not know how to save it. Even we here, hold the power and bear the responsibility. In giving freedom to the slave, we assure freedom to the free, honorable alike in what we give and what we preserve. We shall nobly save or meanly lose the last best hope of earth. Other means may succeed. This could not fail. The way is plain, peaceful, generous, just, a way which, if followed, the world will forever applaud, and God must forever bless. Okay. Oh. So after that, a month later, Abraham Lincoln signed the Emancipation Proclamation. Now I'm going to read from Martin Luther King Jr. The title is A Letter from Birmingham City Jail. And the commentary by William J. Bennett is that Martin Luther K. Martin Luther King Jr. wrote, quote, letter from Birmingham City Jail, end quote, on Easter weekend 1963, while in solitary confinement for leading nonviolent protests against racial discrimination. The letter was a response to a published statement by several leading clergymen calling for an end to the demonstrations. King assured that the demonstrators' course was the morally responsible one, and he predicted that one day the nation would recognize the heroes who acted with, quote, the noble sense of purpose that enables them to face jeering and hostile mobs, and with the agonizing loneliness that characterizes the life of the pioneer, end quote. Here are excerpts from one of the nation's most important political and moral documents dealing with the issues of respect for law and the grounds for justified civil disobedience. Okay, so now, Martin Luther King Jr. wrote, I think I should indicate why I am here in Birmingham, since you have been influenced by the view which argues against, quote, outsiders coming in, end quote. So, I, along with several members of my staff, am here because I was invited here. I am here because I have organizational ties here. But more basically, I am in Birmingham because injustice is here. Just as the prophets of the 8th century BC left their villages and carried their, quote, thus saith the Lord, end quote, far beyond the boundaries of their hometowns, and just as the Apostle Paul left his village of Tarsus and carried the gospel of Jesus Christ to the far corners of the Greco-Roman world, so am I compelled to carry the gospel of freedom beyond my own hometown. Like Paul, I must constantly respond to the Macedonian call for aid. Moreover, I am cognizant of the interrelatedness of all communities and states. I cannot sit idly by in Atlanta and not be concerned about what happens in Birmingham. Injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. We are caught in an inescapable network of mutuality, tied in a single garment of destiny. Whatever affects one directly affects all indirectly. Never again can we afford to live with the narrow, provincial, quote, outside agitator, end quote, idea. Anyone who lives inside the United States can never be considered an outsider anywhere within its bounds. You deplore the demonstrations taking place in Birmingham, but your statement, I am sorry to say, fails to express a similar concern for the conditions that brought about the demonstrations. I am sure that none of you would want to rest content with the superficial kind of social analysis that deals merely with effects and does not grapple with underlying causes. It is unfortunate that demonstrations are taking place in Birmingham, but it is even more unfortunate that the city's white power structure left the Negro community with no alternative. In any nonviolent campaign, there are 4 basic steps. Collection of the facts to determine whether injustices exist, negotiation, self-purification, and direct action. We have gone through all these steps in Birmingham. There can be no gainsaying the fact that racial injustice engulfs the community. Birmingham is probably the most thoroughly segregated city in the United States. Its ugly record of brutality is widely known. Negroes have experienced grossly unjust treatment in the courts. There have been more unsolved bombings of Negro homes and churches in Birmingham than in any other city in the nation. These are the hard, brutal facts of the case. You express a great deal of anxiety over our willingness to break laws. This is certainly a legitimate concern, since we do so diligently urge people to obey the Supreme Court's decision of 1954 outlawing segregation in the public schools. At first glance, it may seem rather paradoxical for us consciously to break laws. One may well ask, how can you advocate breaking some laws and obeying others? The answer lies in the fact that there are two types of laws, just and unjust. I would be the first to advocate obeying just laws. One has not only a legal but a moral responsibility to obey just laws. Conversely, one has a moral responsibility to disobey unjust laws. I would agree with St. Augustine that, quote, an unjust law is no law at all, end quote. Now, what is the difference between the two? How does one determine whether a law is just or unjust? A just law is a man-made code that squares with the moral law or the law of God. An unjust law is a code that is out of harmony with the moral law. To put it in the terms of St. Thomas Aquinas, an unjust law is a human law that is not rooted in eternal law and natural law. Any law that uplifts human personality is just. Any law that degrades human personality is unjust. All segregation statutes are unjust because segregation distorts the soul and damages the personality. It gives the segregator a false sense of superiority and the segregated a false sense of inferiority. Segregation, to use the terminology of the Jewish philosopher Martin Buber, substitutes an I-it relationship for an I-thou relationship and ends up relegating persons to the status of things. Hence, segregation is not only politically, economically, and sociologically unsound, it is morally wrong and sinful. Paul Tillich has said that sin is separation. It is not segregation an existential expression of man's tragic separation, his awful estrangement, his terrible sinfulness? Thus it is that I can urge men to obey the 1954 decision of the Supreme Court, for it is morally right, and I can urge them to disobey segregation ordinances, for they are morally wrong. Let us consider a more concrete example. Whoops. Hey, did I lose a page? Let us. Oh, the last paragraph. Let us consider a more concrete example of just and unjust laws. An unjust law is a code that a numerical or power majority group compels a minority group to obey but does not make binding on itself. This is difference made legal. By the same token, a just law is a code that a majority compels a minority to follow and that it is willing to follow itself. This is sameness made legal. Let me give another explanation. A law is unjust if it is inflicted on a minority that, as a result of being denied the right to vote, had no part in enacting or devising the law. Who can say that the legislature of Alabama, which set up the state's segregation laws, was democratically elected? Throughout Alabama, all sorts of devious methods are used to prevent Negroes from becoming registered voters, and there are some counties in which, even though Negroes constitute a majority of the population, not a single Negro is registered. Can any law enacted under such circumstances be considered democratically structured? Sometimes a law is just on its face and unjust in its application. For instance, I have been arrested on a charge of parading without a permit. Now, There is nothing wrong in having an ordinance which requires a permit for a parade, but such an ordinance becomes unjust when it is used to maintain segregation and to deny citizens the First Amendment privilege of peaceful assembly and protest. I hope you are able to see the distinction I am trying to point out. In no sense do I advocate evading or defying the law, as would the rabid segregationist. That would lead to anarchy. One who breaks an unjust law must do so openly, lovingly, and with a willingness to accept the penalty. I submit that an individual who breaks a law that conscience tells him is unjust and who willingly accepts the penalty of imprisonment in order to arouse the conscience of the community over its injustice is in reality expressing the highest respect for law. You speak of our activity in Birmingham as extreme, but though I was initially disappointed at being categorized as an extremist, and as I continued to think about the matter, I gradually gained a measure of satisfaction from the label. Was not Jesus an extremist for love? Quote, love your enemies, bless them that curse you, do good to them that hate you, and pray for them which despitefully use you and persecute you, end quote. Was not Amos an extremist for justice? Quote, let justice roll down like waters and righteousness like an ever-flowing stream, end quote. Was not Paul an extremist for the Christian gospel? Quote, I bear in my body the marks of the Lord Jesus, end quote. Was not Martin Luther an extremist? Quote, here I stand, I cannot do otherwise, so help me God, end quote. And John Bunyan, quote, I will stay in jail to the end of my days before I make a butchery of my conscience, end quote. And Abraham Lincoln, this nation cannot survive half slave and half free, end quote. And Thomas Jefferson, we hold these truths to be self-evident that all men are created equal, end quote. So the question is not whether we will be extremists, but what kind of extremists we will be. Will we be extremists for hate or for love? Will we be extremists for the preservation of injustice or for the extension of justice? One day the South will recognize its real heroes. They will be the James Merediths with the noble sense of purpose that enables them to face jeering and hostile mobs, and with the agonizing loneliness that characterizes the life of the pioneer. They will be old, oppressed, battered Negro women, symbolized in a 72-year-old woman in Montgomery, Alabama, who rose up with a sense of dignity and with her people decided not to ride segregated buses, and who responded with ungrammatical profundity to one who inquired about her weariness, quote, my feet is tired, but my soul is at rest, end quote. They will be the young high school and college students and young ministers of the gospel and host of their elders, courageously and non-violently sitting in at lunch counters and willingly going to jail for conscience's sake. One day, the South will know that when these disinherited children of God sat down at lunch counters, they were in reality standing up for what is best in the American dream and for the most sacred values in our Judeo-Christian heritage, thereby bringing our nation back to those great wells of democracy which were dug deep by the founding fathers in their formulation of the Constitution and the Declaration of Independence. I hope this letter finds you strong in the faith. I also hope that circumstances will soon make it possible for me to meet each of you, not as an integrationist or a civil rights leader, but as a fellow clergyman and a Christian brother. Let us all hope that the dark clouds of racial prejudice will soon pass away and the deep fog of misunderstanding will be lifted from our fear-drenched communities, and in some not too distant tomorrow, the radiant stars of love and brotherhood will shine over our great nation with all their scintillating beauty. Yours for the cause of peace and brotherhood, capitalized, Martin Luther King Jr. End quote. Okay. Old Kinderhook.